everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Zach.
And I'm Seth.
And I'm Theo.
And we're the Classic Gaming Brothers. And Theo.
And Theo.
That's right. So, as everyone is aware who's listening, we do have a guest on our show today.
What?
It is Theo, who, yes, he literally just introduced himself.
Sorry, the green room, by the way, fantastic. The fruit basket that you provided.
Thank you.
The open bar.
Thank
you.
I've
been on many podcasts. I've never seen a green room quite like this one.
Seth said don't spend all the money on the bar, but I said that's exactly what I'm going to do.
The mariachi band is what got me.
Like, you know,
I wouldn't have even thought of that.
I want to make sure
impeccable.
that our guests have the best.
I'm well hydrated and very entertained and ready to get going and talk about some video games.
That's excellent.
That's good. Perfect. And Theo joins us from his YouTube channel, the Gallant Goblin, and where he does unboxings of Dungeons and Dragons related products and reviews of said Dungeons and Dragons related products that are probably the most in-depth on YouTube, to be honest. And they are extremely well annotated, which is my favorite part of the Gallant Goblin, is that like every moment of the video is annotated, so I know exactly where I need to go to, and it's probably the best created. Like all of the YouTube videos that I've witnessed, the Gallant Goblins are the most methodically created, in my opinion. Straight up.
I appreciate that. That is 100% Grady, my partner, does that part of it, and he has a personality where he and I both, everything needs to be organized. We don't want to waste anybody's time. And so if you want to watch just this one figure being reviewed and all you care about is that no more warlock, like you will know exactly where to click to hear that no warlock information and see everything you need to know about that no warlock, and you can get out and go live your life and you'll be good to go.
That's excellent.
Yeah, give all my love to Grady then.
I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that.
It's great. So if you're interested in Dungeons and Dragons related content
and
or other like Pathfinder and Starfinder,
yeah,
you should check out the Gallant Goblin. Give them a subscribe and like, and we will do some additional plugging at the end of the segment as well. But let's get into the episode, as it were, as the ritual dictates. As our guest, Theo, what have you most recently been playing?
Oh gosh, I didn't know that went first. Well, as I was telling you a little bit before we got started, after I was coming out of the green room trying to get over the mariachi band, I'm in the process of moving recently, so I haven't had a lot of time besides playing really terrible iPhone games that are just money grabs. But one of the games that I got into more recently that I've been wanting to play for ages and just was waiting was No Man's Sky by Hello Games, which I'm sure you all have dabbled into.
Yeah.
And I think my taste in games has changed so much over the years. And I've somehow come around to the idea of not the survival games exactly, but the games where you're building something and constructing something, making kind of an engine for yourself. It may have come from some of my board games that I've really enjoyed playing, where you're kind of building up an engine and making things efficient. And that game where you can just go out there at your leisure, play at your own pace, and just go collect things, build things, improve things, make things better, make things prettier. And that game is super pretty, if nothing else. It's a beautiful, gorgeous game, and on every platform imaginable. And it's been out for 5 years now, almost 5 years. And I don't know what y'all's experience with it is. I enjoyed it. The procedural generated nature of it and the sort of lack of a strong narrative kind of makes it have a limited shelf life for me. Like I can play it for so long, but I really like that story or the character or some emotion. Like if I had if the people who lived in my base actually had a personality or interacted with each other, I'd be much more on board. If you ever played, I don't know how this segment goes necessarily, like the old, what were those games called? Starflight games back in like the 40s. Starflight 2, Star Control 2, all those games where you had, these are ancient games.
Yeah.
Y'all are too young for this. You have a little starship and you build it out and you collect crew members and you can name them, and they kind of had personalities as much as you could have a personality in a video game in 1991, but it was great. And so that's kind of what brought me back to this, kind of going back full circle.
Awesome.
Have you played it in VR?
No, that sounds good though.
It's very good. So I played it in VR with my buddy. I have a HTC Vive, and as people who are dedicated to listening would know that I play in a room that is not sized for VR, and I cheated the space with putting my hand in places where it shouldn't go to be able to extend the VR play space out, and have injured myself while playing VR games more than once. And No Man's Sky was one of the games that I was playing where I have injured myself by moving things around. I did enjoy, though, that when you fly the ship, you sit down for it, which means that I'm not going to injure myself. So it's always safe bet when I'm sitting down that I can not punch my hand into a bookcase or something like that. But I enjoyed No Man's Sky when I play with friends. I'm very similar mindset when it comes to like a single player story, single player experience. I really like to have like a real strong, heavy story, because I guess as I am now, I feel like my time is more valuable to me, and I really want that time to be filled with a story versus like a grind. Even if that grind is enjoyable, I'd still rather have like the story 9 times out of 10. But when playing games with a friend, it's always a little different. And No Man's Sky, I had a pretty fun time playing with my friend. I'm also not a very adept player of video games.
We're bad at video games, is what Seth's trying to say.
Yeah.
We have a video game podcast, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mean we're good at video games.
No, yeah, the opposite.
Nobody wants to listen to somebody who's good at podcasts.
Right, yeah.
That just makes them feel bad.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not good at either video games or podcasts. but we so it was fun. I enjoyed my experience with that. I've been meaning to get back, but I've actually collapsed my VR setup while I've been working from home, so it just takes up a lot of space. I did read an article recently about No Man's Sky, though, that I think you would enjoy. They found a planet that was entirely beige. It was apparently the most boring planet in the galaxy, and everything was brown. It just was. They were like, we don't know why this exists, but when landing, it was like going into Kansas and like the Wizard of Oz. It's just like, oh, and everything is just gray and dreary. I was like, that's amazing. I want to go to just like the doldrum planet. Oh yes.
That is the thing about No Man's Sky 2, is that once you played and you realize like, oh, all the same kind of buildings are on each planet, the same kind of landmarks, and there's really no real discovery. I don't feel like too much, at least in the time I played it. You know, they all have they kind of a flavor. There's an ice planet and, you know, a desert-y planet. But
Yeah.
it's all a bit repetitive. I think I've learned that I don't like the procedurally generated games as much as I like games that are like have a real map. Like this Starflight. We'll have to come back and do an episode about Starflight, and you all need to play this game. But Starflight had a full map that was prepared for it, that had a story that kind of went around the galaxy. There's different alien races that own different sectors and whatnot, but it was not procedurally generated. It was all planned out, and I dig that. That's what I like.
Yeah, I agree. I'm a big fan of handcrafted versus procedural, like the machine created. I mean, eventually machines will become smart enough where it will feel like it's handcrafted, but that technology is not here. Zach, do you want to take it away for what you've been recently been playing?
Yeah, so I've been playing a game that is kind of more in line with having a heavy story and being more of a story-based game, and that is Control, released in 2019. It was developed by Remedy Entertainment and published by 505 Games. It is, as of the recording and the release of this episode, free on PS Plus. So if you have PS Plus, it's free for the month of February. It's a third-person kind of horror action game, I would call it. You play as this woman who ends up at a mysterious place called the Federal Bureau of Control, and you find a cool gun, and when you find that cool gun, it makes you the new director of the Federal Bureau of Control, because who holds the gun holds control, I guess. Yeah, and it's just about like there's this weird anomaly that's occurring at the bureau, and you have to kind of figure out what's going on. I'm really enjoying it. It's also apparently based on the SCP Foundation, which is this like community-run creepypasta repository that is set in like this heavily bureaucratic setting of like people going through the bureaucracy of organizing how to contain anomalies. So it's heavily inspired by that, which is fun because I'm a fan of the SCP Foundation as a concept. So it's kind of cool to be in a video game setting of it.
Is that's the internet website where they like document all the creepypasta?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. So
I have a story about that.
I mean, we're here for stories.
So in my day job, or at least my previous day job, I was a school psychologist. So helping kiddos who might have disabilities in special education. And some of the kiddos we would deal with, especially when it gets to middle school, intermediate school, I had one kiddo, and this is not a great story, but I had one kiddo who was really deep into creepypasta. But
Oh.
I had never even heard of this before. And if
Yeah.
you've never heard of creepypasta, maybe you all can give a better definition than I can. But it's urban legends that are...
Yeah.
It's basically just urban legends, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah. It's modern.
They
urban
generally
legends.
originate 4chan or something like
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
Or
And he referred me to this website. I think he had a little bit of autism going on as well, but he could cite each of the articles in this SCP Foundation website with the number of the anomaly, and he would talk about it. I think he thought they were all real.
Oh.
And so that made it problematic. But I was very much exposed to that from trying to help this kiddo break away from some of the control nature of that. So it is a thing that's out there that I don't think a lot of people are aware of. I wasn't aware of it.
It's a really neat website in the sense that it is heavily community driven. So every story is written usually by an individual, and then that is further elaborated on and edited by other individuals. And it's also mostly an anonymous sort of platform, so you really don't know who's going to take your story and turn it into something entirely new. And it's spawned a lot of video games that directly pull from the lore. So there's like SCP Containment Breach on Steam, or there's another one where it's based on like walking down a stairwell and then something spooky happens, but that's like one of the stories. But this is like the first one that actually like takes the idea of the Foundation, just this place of bureaucracy that apparently is the source of where these anomalies are able to be controlled or contained, and turns it into something. So it's definitely worth giving a shot, especially if you have PS Plus, as it is free until the Wednesday following this episode. So if you download it now, it's yours to keep if you have PS Plus. So,
but if you listen to this episode in the future, it's probably not free anymore.
Probably not free anymore. Usually it's not that expensive though. It's usually on sale.
Yeah, I think Steam was running it for 50% off. I almost picked it up, and then I remembered that I had a very extensive Steam backlog that I really need to work on. And I really shouldn't. I've been trying to stop buying video games, which is a problem of mine. Speaking of video games, so recently I've been playing Ravenloft Stone Prophet, which is a video game that, we talked about in episode 62. I won't go too far into it since we dedicated an entire episode to most of it. And it is a game that was developed by Entertainment with an I and published by good old SSI, Strategic Simulation Incorporated, who used to do all the D&D stuff. And I picked it up. I really just started playing it again because we talked about it, and I was like, I really should beat that. And I still haven't beaten it. I probably put another 4 hours into it. It's a long game, and it's also incredibly tough. It just sets you up for just failure, which, I mean, it's a Ravenloft game, so I'm not really expecting anything different. Ravenloft is notoriously horror and tough. I did get to the part where I have finally kicked Piotro out of my group, and I've recruited Raktor, the Wemmick, who is part man, part lion, which is much better than a centaur. And so I'm playing, I have a dwarf named Dwarg, which is great, his DWARG, and I only remember, so fun story about the dwarf named Dwarg is I have named a lot of people Dwarg in my entire life of D&D. Many characters have been named Dwarg. Most of them have been dwarves. And I chose that name because of an old Choose Your Own Adventure book that was released way back in the day where the main character was this guy named Lionel. And it was like one of those old, like, weird color flip books that were like maybe like yay high, yay wide. And there was a dwarf in that book and his name was Dwarg. And so I chose his name. I only probably just realized like a year ago that it was just dwarf with a G, but
It's probably a typo. It was probably a typo.
Yeah,
at some
that's
point.
literally the F is the next to the G.
yeah. So that's my life story about the name Dwarg. And I have a character, elven fighter mate. Dwarg is a cleric, and then he has an elf. There's an elf named Riley, who is a lady who's wearing a mask because it's COVID time. And Trajan Kent. That's my party, as it were. And it's good. We're at the part of the game that's like the middle, I guess. It's called the Obelisk. And I have to descend through this 3-floor dungeon to get to the end to go to the top again to find a bunch of pieces of this seal to then prevent Octopot from rising or help him rise. I haven't figured out that rest of that part yet, but
it sounds like a Dungeons and Dragons game. It does.
It's definitely a Dungeons and Dragons game. It's got a really bad inventory management system, and I mentioned this in the Ravenloft episode, but I'll mention this again for Theo's benefit. The characters are in 4 panels, so you have 2 characters and then 2 characters, right? So and the 2 characters on the side panels are technically in the back of the group, kind of like how Grimrock does it as well, I think, where there's like 2 people in the back. Grimrock's like a dungeon crawler game. It's pretty cool. And the Wemmick, who is Raktor, he has to wield a long weapon to hit from the back, as well as Trajan Kent. So Trajan Kent's got this big staff. The Wemmick has a spear, but once he throws the spear, he is now unarmed and cannot do any damage because his fists do not reach the front. But if I put him to the front, then the people who do the most damage, my rogue mage and my fighter cleric, they don't have reach weapons either. So I'm just really like struggling with this part, and I'm getting besieged by man scorpions, which are part man, part scorpion, as the name might imply.
But people don't realize that in the Ravenloft setting, that you're not allowed, you can only walk 2 by 2. That's the only option. Just everyone has to go 2 by 2, and that's just the way it is in this universe.
Right. and Tusken Raiders.
I mean, it was a cultural choice. I'm sure there's some religious significance behind it with Tatiana or something, but
so this particular episode is actually a very important episode to me personally, and I would also say Theo, since we were discussing having Theo on the show and we were talking about games to talk about, and we thought that this would be a fun episode to talk about it, and we were going to talk about Baldur's Gate. And I think most of the content's going to be around the Baldur's Gate PC games that came out in the 90s, well, pretty much at the end of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s, also known as the Ball Spawn series, not to be confused with the Dark Alliance series, which is an entirely different type of game. So we'll talk a little bit about Baldur's Gate, we'll talk a little about Baldur's Gate 2, and then we'll talk about some of the other tangential Baldur's Gates, and talk a little bit about Baldur's Gate 3, which is a new game that is coming out. So, Theo, what are your memories behind the Baldur's Gate? It could be the original Baldur's Gate, it could be that whole thing. What tell us about your life.
So Baldur's Gate came out in 1998, which was the year I graduated from high school. It feels to me like it came out before that. I don't know why. I don't have specific memories of playing the original Baldur's Gate, but I know I did because I got hooked and played almost every other iteration of that type of game after that. And I'm sure it was my first exposure to Dungeons and Dragons, because I did not play real D&D until much, much later in life. But I remember it's one of those things where it feels like you were in middle school. It feels like you were 12, 13 when you're having these formative experiences. And then you go back and look like, no, I was apparently 18. But it was the first real game, I think, that I had ever played where you have the party that's made up of like the rogue and the fighter and the mage. And you can mix and match from different party members. And they all have different personalities in these fantastical races. And you grow and develop over time. This whole concept that is so ubiquitous now. I think this was my first probably real exposure to that, the party-based RPG, computer RPG. And I played it all the way to the end, of course, and Baldur's Gate 2, and then I start to remember more about like the Icewind Dale franchise, and especially when you get on to some of the later ones. But it clearly had an impact on me because that's the type of game and entertainment that really sank into my heart and led me down the path to where I am today, where I'm really heavily involved in Dungeons and Dragons. And even though my memories of that particular game aren't as strong right now, I do know that's where that origin, that seed lies.
Do you feel that, so we do tabletop role playing. It's important to our daily life. What got you into tabletop role playing? Do you feel like it was because of your experience with computer role playing games that led you into naturally transitioning to like tabletop role playing games? Or because you said you got tabletop role playing games later in life, how did you pick up tabletop role-playing games as like a obvious passion, being that you create a channel around figures for it.
I do think that the Baldur's Gate franchise primed me to be ready for it. I just never had anyone in my life who played. And, you know, a lot of us get into it because maybe older siblings or someone might have brought us into it, or just friends growing up. And I just never had that. The first time I ever played was when I was living in Japan in the late 2000s, and my friend Andy wanted to DM a game for us. And I think that I just didn't understand what playing Dungeons and Dragons was. Like, what did a game look like? Nobody could really explain it to me. And we didn't have Critical Role to look at to like, just go look at this YouTube channel and you'll understand it. We didn't have that at the time, at least anything to my knowledge like that. And so he tried to sit down, and God bless him, he did his best to try to explain it to us. And I think that we just had, you know, we got obsessed with like an NPC and just played around, and we didn't really follow his story because we really didn't know what we were doing. But I'm happy to say that he is now in my ongoing Humblewood game that I have going on, which is a great little universe. So he doesn't hate me forever for ruining that, but he's the one who introduced me to it. And then I only played once or twice there, but a couple years later, I actually got into it from watching Harmon Quest, which I hope that you all have seen.
Yeah, I've seen Harmon Quest.
Dan Harmon, who created Rick and Morty and Community, has a little series where he plays Dungeons and Dragons. And they animate it, and it's a fantastic little short. It's like 3 seasons right now, and they have a great DM who they brought in from, I think, the sort of the audience of their ongoing other projects. And they have guest stars every week that are fantastic. And I watched that and like, oh, that's what Dungeons and Dragons is. And I think having it animated certainly helps as well. And then I went from that to Critical Role. So I'm one of those people who came in this resurgence, right? Who came in with Critical Role in that kind of era. So I've only been involved in the hobby for probably 3-ish years at this point.
So you're a fan of the resurgence, as it were?
Yes. That's all I've ever known. That's just me. And so I think a lot of us came into the hobby at this point. And when I look at the comment section of my channel, it's definitely a mixture of people who have been involved in it since first edition, and then people who came in with Critical Role maybe just a couple of years ago like I did, or similar games out there. Critical Role is not the only one, but it certainly has a lot of influence. And then there's people who I somehow just stumble on the channel, and they're like, I've never gotten to play before. How do I get started playing? And who are just like the newest generation ready to get started.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's fun. When I was a child, I was dropped off at a comic book store. That's how, so my father brought me to like t-ball and karate places, and I wouldn't leave the car. I refused to participate. And I was just like, I'm not doing this crap. And so he finally was just like, well, I guess I'll just bring him to a comic book store. And he brought me to a comic book store, and he's like, hey, my son has these books that he bought at the library for 25 cents, like the expert rules. Can he play Dungeons and Dragons with people? And so that I was just left at a comic book store. We actually played in a church of all places. Now it was next to the comic book store because the comic book store was very small. And I played with like 6 strangers that I played with probably for about 6 years every week with these same group of strangers who eventually became my friends, right? I'm seeing these people every Sunday for 4 hours, and it was good. We actually went through the entire Temple of Elemental Evil. That is a very long campaign. We went through that, and we went through A Night Below, which is another very long campaign. So they were very fun. Do you remember your first character that you made?
I have not made many characters because I am always the game master.
Oh, that's sad.
Gosh, my first player character. You know what it was? The first time I I played with Andy's game, and I don't really remember that much about that game. I think the first time I really played as knowing what I was doing was, do you know who James Hake is? James Hake was a writer for Wizards of the Coast, who makes Dungeons and Dragons. He was the head writer for a couple of adventures like, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, and a couple of the other official adventures. He was most recently the head writer for D&D Beyond, which is a fantastic computer resource to manage your character and everything. And he did a little fundraiser, and I pitched in enough so I could play in one of his games. And so
fun.
I made this very overweight dwarf. I think he was a fighter. I don't remember anymore. He was a cook. He was a fighter. He had a huge family, lots of kids, and that was my first character. can't remember his name off the top of my head to go look. He was great. He was fantastic.
My first character was a thief, a rogue, and his first lines spoken, my first role-playing lines, as it were, spoken were, "Hey, I'm a thief." And I found the party in a dungeon, and I had a 7 strength, so I had the joy of doing all of 1 damage on a crit.
They didn't have the finesse weapons or whatever that you could use your dexterity for?
No, no.
Oh,
Yeah,
man.
3rd edition was all strength based for melee damage. So even with my rapier, I would hit with dex, but then all my damage was still based on strength. I had a 7 strength. I rolled 2 1s. We were fighting a troll. I was then murdered. He died 13 times, that character, before I decided to put him down for good.
It's the troll that's supposed to regenerate, not the player character.
Yes. Before we get into our memories, I did want to ask, so when we had a guest on for episode 45, Mike Case, who does toy reviews, more of those bring people on to talk about things that aren't their jobs, as it were. And we did an episode entirely on JRPGs with him. And so I was wondering kind of like, so Baldur's Gate and the series that's Icewind Dale and Planescape Torment, those are all decidedly WRPGs or Western RPGs. And they're, I would say, vastly different between a JRPG and a WRPG. Do you feel, what are your opinions on JRPG? And do you feel like, do you just have a more personal attachment to WRPGs? And like, what, can you back up that kind of reasoning?
Do I have evidence to support it?
Evidence to support. Please present to the judge.
It's interesting because I lived in Japan for 5 years, where I first played Dungeons and Dragons, and I do remember as a child like really enjoying playing Final Fantasy VII and 8. I remember when I subscribed to Nintendo Power for the very first time, they sent me a free game. It was Dragon Quest, I think it was.
Yeah.
I think that's the one. I could be wrong. But I really dug those and I had a lot of fun with them. And I hadn't really played any JRPGs in a long time. And I kept hearing about Persona 5.
Right.
And seeing pictures and seeing how interesting it was. And so when I finally got a PlayStation 4, like 2 years ago, just in time for the new one,
Right.
I picked up Persona 5 and I was so excited. And oh my God, I don't like it.
Oh, no.
I think it's part of that. My attention span is so short now, and Persona 5 is so drawn out. Like it felt like it took forever to get into anything involved in that game. Like just the introduction just was like 2 hours. I'm like, I can't do this. It's nothing wrong with the game necessarily. I think it's not you, it's me. It's just like my attention span is so short and I have so much to do that if a game doesn't jump right into it and let me do what I want to do and get in and get out, then I lose patience with it. And I can see the hope there and the fun that exists in that universe, and I just can't access it because I just don't have the time these days. And so I think that it's going to be hard for me to get back into a JRPG again because they are such investments in time. I don't know if they have any quick ones anymore. So I have a lot of nostalgia and love for them, but just the way they're designed to be played for 30, 40 hours. I played Pokemon Go when everybody else did. If that counts. That's
a JRPG.
Yeah, that's the only Pokemon I've ever played. That's sort of just the J. I think you don't have the RPG part. But I have the love. I just don't have the time anymore.
Right, yeah. I definitely feel that. It's hard, especially to dedicate time to like a backlog, as it were, to play games that you're like, I need to play this game, but now it makes me feel like work. And like, it's just like, you're like, I need to enjoy this. And you just like want to check it off and be done with it. It is satisfying though to check one of those games off, to be like completed with. I just recently got through a Broken Sword series of games and I was just like, done. All right, move on. Next one. It was good, but
I'm the person who like has a to-do list, and if I do something that I've forgotten to put on the list, I write it on the list after I've done it, just so I can cross it off. Yeah, and so that's the most satisfying thing about getting through some of these games, is being able to say I did it.
So to get back to we'll segue with the interview there, but we'll go to my memory since it's an important game to me. So I got Baldur's Gate 2 first, before I got any of the other series of games.
The tradition of our family.
Baldur's Gate, we always get sequels.
Yeah, we had Sonic 2 first. We had like Mario 3 before we had Mario 1. We had
Jungle Strike before Desert Strike.
Desert Strike. Ravenloft the Stone Prophet before Strahd's possession. It's like
So I remember going to probably Ames or Kmart to get the video game. They had a PC section, and I remember the Baldur's Gate games were the big box games, and where they just had so much content to it, and something about Baldur's Gate 2 spoke to me, and I was allowed to purchase one video game with my mother because Baldur's Gate came out when I was still so I'm a little younger than you, Theo.
Rub it in.
So I was in middle school when it happened. So I was still on an allocated amount of money. So I picked that up, and I definitely remember playing at least a year or two of it in middle school. So I definitely bought it when it was new because I had a friend who bought it, and I would call him on the telephone and we would talk on the phone at the same time of playing Baldur's Gate 2 together, but not in the same party. Just we would talk about different strategies, or we would talk about where we were in the game, or like what characters we wanted to make in Baldur's Gate 2 without actually playing it over, because I think it was too complicated for us to even go over like TCP or whatever the networking was back then. We were just children, really. And I just fell in love with the game, the story, and the world. I believe, already possess it. Kind of D&D and Baldur's Gate kind of came around at the same point in time for me in my life. And I think that really together they really helped kind of drive that fantasy love into me. It also, like, our father read The Hobbit to us as children.
Yeah.
So like we were in good company, and my dad played D&D when he was in college. But so that all that kind of coalesced together. And so Baldur's Gate, specifically Baldur's Gate 2, to me was probably like the perfect story and the perfect type of game that I don't think I encountered that type of like love for a game until Mass Effect came out, where I could put like 40 hours in one character easy, and then be like, make another character immediately after beating the game because I want to see something different, and do another 40 hours. Because like Baldur's Gate 2 had like all the strongholds that you could get, like the keep and the wizard's globe and the ranger's hut, and I think I've seen every single one of those strongholds in the game because I've spent so much time playing it. On top of like just you could go evil, you could be good, you could have a whole different party, because as you mentioned, like the NPCs that you recruit on the way have such detailed personalities, and even like interlinking themselves with them talking to each other is just like you're like, okay, I would play the game to be like, I need to recruit this person, and I need to recruit this person, and I need to travel for this amount of time so I can see this conversation happen between them, or something like that, because at some point in time Corgan's going to kill Mazzy, and I want to see them that particular stuff happen. And so for like Baldur's Gate is, to me, it's also a very protected property, as you can probably see. So like with Larian taking on Baldur's Gate 3 and what they've produced so far, we'll have words at the end of the show about that. But I am probably one of the biggest critic that they need to impress, as it were, in regards to like what they're putting out, because of what Baldur's Gate 2 did to me, in regards to building me to be the person who I am. Where Baldur's Gate 1, I only beat recently as an adult, because the story it's not as tight. And without that tightness of a story, it kind of gets a little meandering. And then it's just like, ugh. But so yeah.
Speaking of this characters who came out of that game, I think that the most lasting characters who came out are probably Minsk and Boo, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And they're fantastic. It's a human ranger, I think. It's human, right?
Mm-hmm.
Minsk is, and Boo is his giant miniature space hamster.
Correct.
And thinking about them, I for some reason hadn't made that connection until in my head, thinking about the game for a little while. And there's also a series of comic books that they're still working on. I'm forgetting the fella's name who writes the comic books, even though he sends them to us and Grady reviews them on our website. But there's a fantastic little series of comic books that are still like, this is a narrative that's been going on for 30 years now.
Yeah, absolutely.
One other thing I was going to mention is that we were talking about Critical Role earlier. At D&D Live just a couple of years ago, I got to be there in person. They had Matt Mercer, who is the game master. He played a character from Baldur's Gate in one of the live games there.
He's because he does a lot of the voice work.
They were doing just a live game separate from Baldur's Gate, but he played a character from Baldur's Gate in that live game. And I was wondering if you could guess which character he played. He played one of the NPCs from Baldur's Gate. He played Boo.
Oh, he played. That's funny.
It was fantastic. If you ever get a chance to look it up, it was so funny. But anyway, I digress.
Minska, there actually is a Berserker kit that I think you can play in the game. Actually, I don't know if you can. He has the ability to Berserk, but he might be just a straight Ranger, actually. Because I'm trying to remember in the game, there was a Berserker kit, but I think the Berserker kit fell up under Fighter, and he wasn't a Fighter Berserker. He was a Ranger that just had the Berserk ability, and he would just sometimes just go wild and just start killing party members. So then if he was your strongest frontline fighter, if you raged him and he ran out of targets, he could kill you, he could just wipe your party. And that game was tough. Like, that game was it's not a easy game for sure. Like, I feel like a lot of games that come out now, especially like even like Baldur's Gate 3, comparing back to like Baldur's Gate 2, Baldur's Gate 2 will kill you in the intro dungeon. Like, they don't care. Like, and if your main character dies, the game's over.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like,
I'll talk
done.
about that in a minute too, for another game I was playing recently. But I think that even games like Mass Effect didn't do as good of a job about making the party feel like a party the way that the Baldur's Gate games did.
Yes.
Because if you were a completionist playing Baldur's Gate, you could not have all the possible NPC party members at one time. Because they would literally, like, if you want the chaotic evil person and the lawful good person, they would not be in the same party together. They just
They'd kill each other.
Yeah. They might, and somebody might hang around for a little while and then get so fed up with somebody they would leave. Just having that group that felt like a real group was fantastic. And I can't think of any other game that really did as good of a job as those games did for that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, because even Mass Effect, you can have everybody in it at the end. And where, like, I know for a fact, one of my favorite NPCs from Baldur's Gate 2 was Keldor, the paladin. And he's like this paladin of Helm. And he does not get along with, like, the dwarf. I just said it earlier.
Dorg.
No, not Dorg.
No,
It's like, his name is like Korgarn. Or Korgarn, yeah, he's the evil dwarf, and Konia, who's the elven drow cleric, who's also evil. They don't get along with Keldorn, and they'll fight each other. Like, they'll be like, one of us is leaving, and you have to decide. And you're like,
I was trying to remember if the Dragon Age games delved into that. They might have had something similar, but I don't fully remember.
I don't know. I still feel like you could still have everybody. Like, you could still, because even with Dragon Age Origins, you could like park them at the camp. And you just be like, stay here while I adventure, which is what Baldur's Gate. And that's kind of the interesting thing. Like, with the Baldur's Gate PC, the original game, and the second one, it was even worse than the first one. If you didn't want somebody in your party, they would usually go back to somewhere. But sometimes they wouldn't. And like the original Baldur's Gate, sometimes they would just leave, and you would no longer be able to have that person in your party. So like, it forced you, if you wanted to have that person in your party, you had to make some tough decisions, because you only were allowed 5 really, because one, it has to be you. And it's just kind of like that. So, Zach, why don't you talk about Dark Alliance, because I know that's what you want to talk about.
I'm going to go get a drink.
Yeah, well, I definitely watched Seth play the original Baldur's Gate 2, because I was at that age where I pretty much only played Sonic the Hedgehog or Chex Quest, the Chex cereal Doom game that I'm actually wearing a t-shirt of right now.
Not a visual medium, my friend. Now,
no, yeah. I really only played Sega Genesis games, and when I was playing PC games, I was playing primarily kid-friendly games, so I wasn't really playing Baldur's Gate. I really liked watching Seth play it. It was kind of what exposed me to things like D&D and just fantasy games as a whole. I mean, I was obviously familiar with the fantasy genre thanks to my father reading me The Hobbit, but just kind of like the way that games were able to do that, it was introduced to me via Baldur's Gate. I really did like Dark Alliance, though, which I know Seth doesn't like, but I like it probably for the wrong reasons, because it's a very broken game. As I was talking about before we started recording, my favorite thing that you could do in Dark Alliance is if you beat the game, you can import the character that you've just beaten the game with into a new save, dump their entire inventory, take your brand new character, collect that inventory, and sell it at the very first location, which is this tavern, so you can max out your gold in the very beginning of the game and buy relatively high tier weapons at the very beginning of the game.
That doesn't take place in Waterdeep, though,
No.
right? Does it take place in Baldur's
It
Gate?
takes place. No, it does take place in
well,
Baldur's Gate. The beginning part does. You're in a
Does
tavern
it?
in Baldur's Gate.
So I'm thinking of the Neverwinter Nights game that took place in Waterdeep, where you're in like the Halaster's dungeon. Yeah, because Halaster, the Mad Mage, his dungeon is in Waterdeep and Dark Alliance, but it's still a dungeon under a tavern. Like,
well,
it's
no.
the
So you
most...
start out in the tavern, and they tell you that there are rats in the sewer, and you got to kill the rats. So you go to kill the rats in the sewer, and that leads you into a dungeon where you encounter necromancers.
Which is pretty much every D&D game.
Exactly, but it's great. Also, another fun thing about Dark Alliance is if you are in the last tower, so the last dungeon of the game is this massive tower you have to go through to fight the final boss. There is a room to enter just before you get to the final boss room where you'll find a sword that is the highest tiered sword in the game in terms of any attack strength, and you can kill the boss in 3 hits. So it is the ideal game.
And Dark Alliance was more along the lines of like just a tactical kind of fighting, kind of like Avengers style game, right? Where you just kind of had
it was more of a action RPG, whereas there wasn't any turn based or anything. It was just hack and slash and beat people as much as you can. But it was co-op, which was fun. So you could play with multiple people.
I don't even know, were you able to level up your character?
Yeah, your character, so it is like, it's an action RPG, so your character does level up and there are stats that you can dump things into, but by the time you're at the very end of the game, I'm pretty sure you're maxed on all of your stats. Like, I don't think there's any, it's not like most action RPGs that I've played, like even in games like, even in the Elder Scrolls games or Fallout, when you get to the end game, your character usually still has wiggle room in terms of what you can do with like late stage stats, but like in this you are literally, I think, at the maximum for everything. Like your guy is just like jacked busting in. So it is it's not a hard last final battle for sure. I was like one hitting kill people as I like walked through the enemy base. It's not a good game. But it is fun.
I won't know if necessarily if it's a good game. It's the problem is when you name something Baldur's Gate and there's simultaneously a game that's called Baldur's Gate on the PC, and they are entirely two 100% different products, but yet you're trying to sell them under the same banner is just confusing, and it's just going to lead people into like, you're going to be disappointed, and both people are, right? So the person who's going to enjoy Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance may not necessarily like the deep computer role-playing game, and you might be like, oh, I could get this on the PC, and it is not what you think it is.
Yeah, I have friends,
or vice versa.
I have friends who grew up playing Dark Alliance because they had PS2s. They didn't have gaming PCs or anything, like, or they didn't have a PC, and then they picked up Baldur's Gate via like Steam, and they're like, what is this game? Because it's entirely different.
Yeah, I think it's like that era of time where creators of video games would create two different games for the consoles versus the PC, and like it was just like entirely different experiences. Sometimes the consoles won and sometimes the PCs won in regards to which was the more superior game, but like I feel like that kind of like in that same era. Fortunately, I think that we're moving out of that era, so when they say like this game is going to be released on multiple platforms, it's not, this game is going to be released and it's going to be vastly different on multiple platforms. Like I remember the Spider-Man game that came out for the PlayStation 2, and it also released on the PC, and it was really bad. And it's just like I was just like, why do it's splitting? But now I feel like that era of time is over, fortunately. I think developers have learned that they can just make one game.
Well, also hardware is caught up to what you can do.
True.
So
I feel like the name Baldur's Gate has made a resurgence lately too. Because not only do we have Baldur's Gate 3 coming out, but we had one of the official adventures for Dungeons and Dragons recently was Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, which is really popular. And they also made a version of the board game Betrayal at House on the Hill, Baldur's Gate Betrayal or something like that.
Oh yeah, I saw that like recently. I was at the store and I saw that.
If you've never played Betrayal at House on the Hill, and I know this is a board gaming podcast, right? It's not a game, it's an activity. There's no balance to it. It's just pure chaos. But it is one of the most fantastic things you can do if it's 1 to 2 a.m. in the morning, you're with a group of friends, and you're all mostly drunk. And it is very good fun. I think that if you're playing D&D for a while and you're just too drunk to enjoy it anymore, bust out your copy of Baldur's Gate Betrayal, and you'll have a really good time. It is the silliest thing in the world. And nice. But yeah, Baldur's Gate is around everywhere again.
Yeah, I did. And same with, I feel like they're also trying to cash in on the Icewind Dale name as well.
They're all about the place names lately. They started with Waterdeep, and they had 2 adventures in Waterdeep, then Baldur's Gate, and now Icewind Dale. So maybe we'll have Neverwinter coming
always the Sword
out.
Coast. It's always the Sword Coast.
5e is all set there.
So Baldur's Gate is a franchise that 2 entirely different series kind of spawned off, as we've kind of joked throughout this podcast. The Ballspawn series and the Dark Alliance series. And the Ballspawn series is really the one that is kind of the focus of us, even though Zachary is dragged into the Dark Alliance as much as he could.
Beaten. Like, I want to talk about it.
Yeah.
And you may want to explain who Ball is, because it just sounds really dirty when you say it.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I could do that as well. Ball in the Forgotten Realms is the Lord of Murder. And at one point in time, there was a thing that happened that was called the Time of Troubles, where all the Forgotten Realm gods came down to Earth, or Farron, and were they had some problems, and then they were sent back to the heavens. But after a bunch of things happened, Joaquin went missing, and Ball got murdered. However, Ball predicted that he was going to get murdered. So he went around and made babies with a bunch of people. And
As one does.
those babies...
That's exactly what I was thinking.
it does. Kind of very Zeus, except if Zeus was... Well, I guess Zeus could be a murdering evil person, but...
Zeus does kill a lot of people.
He had his moments, yeah.
Right. So Ball's kind of like the Zeus of Forgotten Realms, who gets whacked. So one of those creatures that spawns from a human is the main character of the Ballspawn series, starting with Baldur's Gate. The Ballspawn series, starting with Baldur's Gate, was released in 1998 as just the Baldur's Gate. And then in 1999, it received an expansion pack, Tales of the Sword Coast. And then there was a sequel to Baldur's Gate, which was Baldur's Gate 2, Shadows of Amn, which was released in 2000, and that received an expansion called Throne of Ball in 2001. I think the coolest part of the Baldur's Gate series, now this is a game that was released in 1998 to begin with, was that you could export and import your character into all the other games. So you could and it was one contiguous story that played over, I'm going to say 120 hours. The script for this thing is like thousands of pages long, the amount of dialogue and all of that in this game. And you can play one person throughout the entire thing, which is amazing. Also leads to a lot of failed attempts for me to be like, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to go through from the beginning to the end with one character, and it always just doesn't go anywhere. I'm in Siege of Dragonsphere, which albeit is not true awesomeness. These 2 games in the expansion packs were all originally developed by BioWare, which eventually was bought by EA, and was published by either Interplay, who ended up having bankruptcy issues, but is currently still around co-publishing games with 3D Realms, who used to be Apogee Games, or Black Isle, who is now a defunct studio who became Obsidian, who's now bought by Microsoft. The original Baldur's Gate game took, according to sources, 90 man-years of development and was developed through a team of 60 people over the course of about 3 years, since they started development in 1995. So they worked a lot of overtime on putting this out. It was entirely a lot of crunch. It was... Not only did they develop the game and the content of the story of the original Baldur's Gate, but they also developed the Infinity Engine as well, along with that. They were actually originally going to call it just Forgotten Realms, but they decided over time that they should create Baldur's Gate. And there were some people within the team that were very, very big fans of all of the current 90s R.A. Salvatore novels that were out, and Ed Greenwood and all of those other guys that wrote stuff. And it did draw very, very heavily, the original Baldur's Gate, on Wasteland, especially the whole philosophy of like, you can accomplish the same goal through different ways. So you can either stealth through an encounter, you could talk your way through an encounter, you could kill your way through an encounter. They were very open about you could just murder random people, like if you wanted to, and still continue to progress through the game. An interesting fact about the game is that of that time period, a lot of games, all the graphics were tile-based, and each was essentially the background of the world was built out into these like blocks, and your sprite would walk across these interconnected tiles. However, Baldur's Gate drew and rendered all of their backgrounds. So not only did that make for a very beautiful game, it just took a lot longer to do and to get it to launch, and also involved them reusing somewhat or having very similar simple style, like forests and more forests and more forests. And if you played Baldur's Gate, you will remember the forests. And because that's kind of, they were just trying to get the game out and trying to fill in filler there. And it was the first game release on that 60-person team. It was the first game for every single one of them to release into market. And a lot of that success of that game was credited due to their partnership between Interplay and BioWare. Now, Theo, do you remember the kind of like the story behind Baldur's Gate? I know you said you had a very vague memories. Do you remember?
It's interesting. Not until I went back and read some of the old summaries of it. I don't have any firm memories. I just remember the characters a little bit more. The characters are what stuck with me. Now, when we start moving on and talking a little bit more about Planescape Torment, that was a story that stuck with me. But the Baldur's Gate story was, I appreciate the fact, kind of going back and looking at it now, it really dug into a lot of the lore that existed for Dungeons and Dragons in that setting, as opposed to just making something very generic. You know, they chose to take advantage of the pre-existing lore, but it was a fairly convoluted, complex story.
Yes, and I think it got more convoluted as you went on. The original game, you kind of started out in like this basic kind of library town,
Candlekeep,
which is also, I think, getting its own thing, or was referenced, or is getting something written about it. It's coming back. I know it is. I saw something recently about it. I think, there's an Candlekeep adventure, mini adventures, like Yawning Portal.
Oh, yeah, of course, the new book. Oh, God, I've already forgotten. Yeah,
yes.
The next book coming out in a couple of months here is a series of mysteries that takes place in Candlekeep.
Yes, which is where this game originates from. Well, your character originates from. And you are the foster child of this guy named Gorion, who gets murdered in the very beginning of the game by Saravok. And it's not really a spoiler alert because this game came out in 1998, and it happens within the first 5 minutes. So I'm not no negative fan mail. And if you haven't played Baldur's Gate and you don't, it's literally the beginning of the story. Your foster father dies, and you hang out with your Imoen, who is a early character, and you go on some quests. The initial quests are just trying to figure out what's going on with iron production, because the iron ore is bad and breaking, which is annoying, and it's a really annoying game mechanic. Like, I hate the game mechanic because your iron weapon will just break, and I really, really hate breaking weapons mechanics in games. And you eventually have to stop Saravok, who is the guy who killed Gorion. It is very meandering and kind of directionless sometimes, but is
you're really selling it, especially with the whole like, gotta figure out what's wrong with the iron production.
The spoiler alert: just go play Planescape Torment.
Yes, you could just go play Planescape Torment if you want to read a book, and or Baldur's Gate 2. Which, fun fact, only Baldur's Gate 1 takes place anywhere near Baldur's Gate. All of the other games take place nowhere near, well, somewhat near, but not anywhere near. You never go back to Baldur's Gate after Baldur's Gate 1. Baldur's Gate 2 takes place in Athkatla, which is a city in the country of Am, and it's also known as the City of Coin. And they worship Joaquin predominantly, who is missing, so which is always fun, because they're like, oh, Joaquin is gone and she'll come back. But the game is Baldur's Gate 2 Shadows of Am, because it primarily takes place in Am. And Baldur's Gate 2 takes off from a different location. Like, it takes place starting after Baldur's Gate 1, but a significant time where they have a movie explaining what happens, and Theo gets confused about, thinking that...
Well, let me explain this. That was all fair. I went to try to go back and play with these just a little bit before we had this podcast today. So I downloaded. They have an enhanced, new, updated version of Baldur's Gate 2 that you can get that makes it playable on today's computers. And when you load it up, it just gives you 3 covers, and they all have subtitles because everything got to have a subtitle in the 2000s. And it doesn't really make it clear what order you're supposed to play them in. And so I clicked one, and it just started playing a recap movie. and it was a very in-depth recap movie, but it ended up recapping Baldur's Gate 1 and the story that happened there. I had forgotten that the stories were so closely linked together that, as you said, you can import your character from one to the other the way you did in Mass Effect. Not even all that well in Mass Effect, to be honest. But so the whole movie played, and I thought, oh no, I just clicked on the expansion for Baldur's Gate 2, and I just completely ruined the entire story of Baldur's Gate 2 while trying to play Baldur's Gate 2. And I couldn't even figure out how to stop the movie. I didn't escape and everything, it wouldn't stop. But luckily, I was just spoiling Baldur's Gate 1, which nobody wants to play anyway.
Well, I mean, Baldur's Gate 1 for sure is, like, if you want a computer role-playing experience, Baldur's Gate 1 can give it to you.
It is an experience.
Baldur's Gate 2.
It is a game that exists.
Yeah.
Baldur's Gate 2 will give you a better experience. Yeah. And the story for Baldur's Gate 2 revolves around a evil elf named John Irenicus, and he captures you and then kidnaps Imoen. Once again, it's not a spoiler, it happens within 5 minutes of the game. Just like Seraph killing Orion, John Irenicus will kidnap Imoen. I think one of my favorite iconic moments of that game is that moment when you erupt from John Irenicus' dungeon and you're standing there on the rubble and you start fighting John Irenicus, and Imoen throws like magic missiles and John Irenicus is like using his powers, and then the Cowled Wizards of Am appear because using magic in Am without a license is illegal. So they are like, we're here to stop you, and there's like 8 of them. They show up, and so John Irenicus, who is a powerful mage, just starts murdering them. And he's like, nothing can stop me. I'm invincible. And he just starts throwing stuff around. And the people are like, dude, you need to stop. You are literally breaking the law. And he's like, I don't care. But then all of a sudden he's like, wait. You're going to arrest me? And they're like, yes. And he's like, well, Imoen, she also used magic. They're like, we're going to arrest you all. And he's like, that's fine. I'm fine with that. And then he gets arrested with Imoen. That's where the game takes place, because all of your characters just stood there and watched this happen while Imoen was like, I'm going to throw a magic missile. And that got her arrested and put into wizard prison. And then you have to rescue her from wizard prison, and that's where the game goes on. You're going to spend 40 hours doing that, and it's amazing. It's a tight storyline. All of the classes in the game have unique strongholds that have their own subquests and stuff that you can get. So if you're a rogue, you can get a thieves guild. If you're a wizard, you can get a sorcerer's plane or disc bulb thing. If you're a fighter, you get a keep. Cleric, you get a room at the temple, and a paladin, you get a room at the paladin guild hall. Some of the strongholds are lamer than the others, but they all have their own.
When you talk about that opening, I remember that. I can remember experiencing that. That was an iconic moment. I wouldn't have remembered it until you described it, but now I can see that.
The voice acting is on point. What's great is John Irenicus is he's the butler from the Titanic or something like that. Yeah, so the guy, the butler who, if you're familiar with the Titanic movie, there's
like the
butler, the James Cameron Titanic.
Been a little while.
Yeah.
There's a butler who, at the end of the movie, he chains Leonardo DiCaprio to the pipe and then has a gun. He's like an evil butler.
They're all evil. They're always a murderer. Yeah.
Well, he's the voice of John Irenicus.
They should have gotten the butler from the Lara Croft movies, though, who was Chris Berry, who was Rimmer in Red Dwarf. Then I would have been on board.
But it's John Irenicus, the evilest wizard around, and he's the butler. But
that's awesome, though.
It's a good moment. If you watch the Titanic movie ever again, you just remember John Irenicus is the butler. And I think also that the voice actor they had for the transition scenes with the deep booming voice, I thought was just really well, and like set the pacing of he was essentially the voice of the DM. And it describing like the moments of the game through exposition versus graphics was a way to allow, I felt, your creativity to kind of blend into the actual game itself. I always really appreciated that aspect of it because, once again, it's an isometric computer role-playing game. So you're looking at sprites on a drawn background. So you can't really experience like ascending through like a cave into the shining light like you may in like Skyrim or Fallout or something like that, where you can experience that. They don't need to describe that to you. But for a game where you're like playing as little sprites that are like maybe an inch tall, less than that, then yeah, you're going to need that additional context to kind of draw you into the story. And I think they did that really, really well in Baldur's Gate 2. And which I thought was funny was the expansion pack to Baldur's Gate 1. Tales of the Sword Coast gave you a little extra stuff, maybe some little cool like super dungeon and stuff like that. Thrown a Ball made it like epic. And in fact, it gave you epic levels. And it was kind of cool being able to play that super powered character with the ability to do Meteor Swarm or Time Stops or those kind of like spells that you just dream about doing as a character. But Baldur's Gate just gives that to you. Big fan of Baldur's Gate 2, as it were. So in 2012 and 2013, Beamdog did remaster Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2. And in 2016, Beamdog released Siege of the Dragonspear, which was a stopgap sequel to Baldur's Gate 1, but prequel to Baldur's Gate 2. It's all right. I haven't played much of it. I played a little bit of it, and it's not good of a story of Baldur's Gate 2, I think. It's kind of like, this is what happened in between, and it's about as exciting as that. Theo, did you play any bit of the Siege of the Dragonspear? Or...
I didn't even know that existed until you said it just now. I had no idea.
It takes place around another ball spawn who has a spear that's called the Spear of the Dragonspear.
Oh, well named.
And they lead an army and try to fight Baldur's Gate, and you have to be the hero again. And eventually you end up camping, and then you get besieged by thieves or people in the night, and that gets you into Baldur's Gate 2. That's kind of how I feel about it. Like just that kind of sensation there. I'm glad that they remastered the games, though. It's nice being able to play them. You can play it on your phone.
I didn't get a chance to see how it works on there. I think clearly you could play it on an iPad. I wonder if you could really play it on a phone with any kind of fidelity.
I had a friend who beat or got very close to beating the original Icewind Dale on his phone. Wow. But I think that's mostly due to the fact that he played it during work. So.
It doesn't strike me as one of those pick up and play games, because when you pick up Baldur's Gate 2, you don't want to sit there and play it for 2 minutes. Like, you want to dig in and spend a few hours.
I feel like they only put it on the phone because they can. It's like...
I mean, there are a lot of us sitting in the subway for an hour,
true.
sitting somewhere traveling on an airplane or something. But, I mean, it is great that they also brought these back up, because the old game's really just not playable anymore on modern computers anyway. And so this is the only way that we would be able to have access to them at all.
I did the jewel case with like 5 discs or whatever. You had to change the disc out every time you got to the next chapter. It was just like, gotta swap the disc out. And I was happy because at one point in time I had a computer that had 2 optical drives, so I could load 2 discs at the same time, so then I could just tell it to look at the other drive so I didn't have to change discs anymore
as many times.
Now no computers need optical drives.
I'm pretty sure that both Grady and I still have those discs, and I saw awesome. Grady's has some over there, and I'm sure I have mine too. Yeah, I have all those Icewind Dale. Yeah, I have all that still. I don't throw anything away.
It's not a good game unless you're opening a book of CDs to be able to play it.
Oh right, yeah.
But the enhanced editions are really beautiful.
So
they're
good.
like, not only are they running well on modern systems, but they're also upscaled 1080p, 60 frames per second, the best quality you can get out of these games, which, when they came out, they weren't capable of doing that. So it's really cool to see them push to that limit. And
the music is fantastic too, and they remastered the soundtrack too.
The orchestral score is amazing for Baldur. You could just get the soundtrack for that and just listen to it. I actually usually get Pillars of Eternity and Tyranny were games released by Obsidian, which are kind of like spiritual successors to the Baldur's Gate, since a lot of the Black Isle folks work at Obsidian now. I use their soundtracks to sometimes to be the background noise for D&D games.
Oh yeah,
like it's their like that. That's good for like ambiance noise too, because they're mostly all orchestral. Yeah. I was playing Baldur's Gate on the Switch. I owned the complete collection for Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2 and all the expansions on the Switch, which I actually think is cool. It's a little... it probably took me a couple hours to get the control schemes right, because you're playing with a joystick and stuff like that, but they do have functionality built in, so it makes it a lot easier to drive around with the joystick, and it's playable. I think I haven't played it in a while, though, so I feel like if I go back to it, I'm going to have problems again getting back into it, but it works. I think we're going to get to our part where we talk about Baldur's Gate 3 now.
So Baldur's Gate 3, unlike the other 2 games, is actually not finished yet. It's currently in early access, and it has been in early access since at least September of 2020. It's also a different game than the previous Baldur's Gate games. During PAX East of 2020, which Seth and I were in attendance, and you can hear about our time there on episodes 12 and 14 of this podcast, it was announced for the first time that the game was going to be kind of a different style of gameplay, more similar to that of the Divinity games, Divinity Original Sin and Divinity Original Sin 2. The reason being is that Baldur's Gate 3 is being developed and published by Larian Studios, who previously worked on the Divinity games. So it would make sense that they're going to adapt their style of turn-based games for this new Baldur's Gate game. Development of Baldur's Gate 3 actually began as far back as at least 2003. Black Isle was working on a game called The Black Hound, and then Interplay had a little problem called bankruptcy, and that means that they shuttered Black Isle because they needed to find a way to save money, and the only way to do that was by cutting things out. Around 2008, Interplay actually lost the license to make D&D games because Atari ended up gaining the license from Wizards of the Coast. And then Atari would later use that license to create games such as Neverwinter Nights.
Which I enjoyed Neverwinter Nights. I thought they were a great game, but I really loved the intro to it where they talk about how Baldur's Gate sparked a role-playing renaissance, but Neverwinter Nights was going to be a role-playing revolution. It's a great marketing like trailer, and I recommend watching at least the trailer to Neverwinter Nights 1 for some really like dated iconic marketing type deal. It's got a great score in the trailer itself and some things that are not going to be in the game ever because they didn't implement them.
Yeah. So in 2014, Larian was interested in picking up the Baldur's Gate IP, and they approached Wizards of the Coast and said that we would like to make the next Baldur's Gate game. At the time, Wizards was a little wary of Larian, mostly because Larian was a very relatively new company, and they wanted the IP of Baldur's Gate to go to a company that they felt they could trust. However, a few years later, Original Sin 2 was coming out, and Wizards of the Coast saw early development stuff for Original Sin 2, and they were actually really impressed by it. So they approached Larian, and they said, hey, we see you're working on this new Divinity game. It looks great. Do you want to make Baldur's Gate? You were interested in it before. And Larian said, yes, but let us finish Original Sin 2 first. So they finished Original Sin 2 and then started work on Baldur's Gate 3. And around E3 of 2019, the first initial teasers for Baldur's Gate 3 were released, and it entered early access on September 30th of 2020.
For full retail.
For full retail price for an unfinished game.
Before we get into Baldur's Gate, I think it's interesting that Wizards license a lot of their products, right? So Wizards does a lot of their tabletop stuff in-house and their Magic the Gathering games, but a lot of their video game stuff, they don't trust internally. Well, they don't have the capacity to do internally, so they shop that out, which Wizards of the Coast is a subsidiary of a local business to me, of Hasbro, because Hasbro is located in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, which I live close to. But Wizards is based in Seattle. But I recently learned while preparing for this podcast that James Olin, as of 2019, is working on stuff for Wizards of the Coast.
He had a book that came out.
He does have his book that came out because he has the
Odyssey of the Dragon Lords.
He runs an Arcanum Publishing, his publishing house. Well, apparently Wizards started something called Archetype Entertainment as of 2019, and James is running it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. He says it's a great place where he can relive the good old days of 90s and early 2000s of game development.
Oh,
it looks like that he's also tapped Chad Robertson, who is also another BioWare person, is over there, and he's going to be the vice president and general manager. So it looks like Wizards is trying to build the old BioWare team, because James was the lead designer and creative director of Baldur's Gate, Baldur's Gate 2, Neverwinter Nights, Star Wars The Knights of the Old Republic, Dragon Age Origins, and Star Wars The Old Republic. And then he retired just because he felt like it. But now apparently he's going to go work for Wizards, and I'm very, 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 very excited to see what James pushes out, because I'm wondering if this is going to be a pivot where Wizards starts taking back game development in-house and starts pulling that in-house and starts pushing out more regular D&D or Beyond type of games where they try to push the limit and develop new intellectual properties. I'm excited. It was good news.
And if you do want to see him working on an actual Dungeons and Dragons tabletop RPG, like definitely check out Odyssey of the Dragon Lords, which was a Greek mythology inspired adventure for levels 1 through 20 that brought a lot of really cool things to the table. And that's one of the third-party adventures I've really wanted to sit down and run. It brought a lot of good storytelling ideas on how to really tie your characters into the story, which is something that is really difficult for a lot of game masters to do. He gives you these heroic quests that tie these people in. If you want to learn more about it, we did a video. You can just Google search Gallant, Goblin, Odyssey of the Dragon Lords. It's a great book. Plug.
Plug.
He's like, cut his mic.
So Baldur's Gate 3, I think we've been hyping it up enough. Theo, what are your thoughts?
I mean, okay, I've only played it for all of half an hour, maybe 45 minutes. It starts off with just a gorgeous cinematic of a Illithid mind flayer ship being attacked by dragons, hopping between planes, going to Avernus. Just awesome looking stuff. As far as the actual gameplay itself, oh gosh, when you ask me about JRPGs, I'm feeling like this is going to be a similar situation. I had so much just frustration trying to get into playing this game because it's a pretty good looking game. It feels clunky in places, but of course it's still in early access, so it's kind of expected, but I don't think they're going to get all the clunkiness out of it. I had half trouble like figuring out where the enemies are I was supposed to attack. I didn't want battles to happen because I just wanted to see the stories. Like, oh, don't make me sit through a battle where I have to hurl a firebolt at these imps for half an hour. I don't care. Like, let's just get through this. Is there an option to play this game without the combat? Because I'm just not interested anymore. I want to hear the story. I want to see these cinematics. That's what I'm here for. Let's just make it a movie.
Yeah.
And
just not the Dungeons and Dragons movie, because that's very bad.
Like James Manganiello is working on one, isn't he? I don't know what's happening with that, but there's a new one apparently in the works.
Yeah.
I definitely, I mean, there's potential there, and I haven't played enough to really know. I don't know if I'm going to have the energy to really go back to it, and I'm going to talk about an alternative game in a minute that is intriguing me more than Baldur's Gate 3. But what did you think of it? It seems like you have a stronger opinion than I do.
I'm going to say I probably played about 12 hours of it. But I've played it like 6 hours with two different characters because I'm not really diving deep into the game because I kind of want to save the playthrough of the game when it actually releases completely. So like my playing of the game is generally like, oh, I want to see how a wizard plays, or I want to see how a rogue plays. And then I'll play through the sections and I'll kind of be like, oh, I really like how they did wizard, or I did not really like how they did this, or something like that. And so I've played it. I liked Divinity and Divinity, the original Sin 2, though I also didn't necessarily, there's something about them where I played a lot of them, I liked them, but I feel like sometimes they're not the best at driving a story. They're like, we got a lot of story here, there's a lot of things to investigate. And then you're like halfway through, I was playing with my friend. I'm like, what are we doing again? I'm like, what's the plot? Like, what are we supposed to do? And I kind of get led astray sometimes with that game. It might be once because of my attention issues or something like that. But I feel like, in Baldur's Gate 3, I feel like the story is a little more succinct. I just hope that they keep it succinct, because when an epic story gets a little meandering, you run into situations where, like Dragon Age Inquisition or Mass Effect Andromeda, I feel like those games for me there was too much to do, and they weren't able to tell me the story succinctly. So I played like maybe 30 or 40 hours. I think I played like 40 hours of Mass Effect Andromeda. I couldn't tell you what my purpose was with that game, and I didn't beat it. I didn't get to the end. Same with Dragon Age Inquisition. I think I played like 40 hours of it, which is a lot. That's a lot of time to sink into a game to then be like, I'm done. I haven't even beaten it. Like, I've just got up and walked away. So hopefully if they put it out with, they're going to have 3 distinct acts and that they have a story, hopefully that it's succinct enough that it carries me through, then I'll like it. I'll enjoy it. The combat for me, I'm figuring out ways to like cheese it. I could completely understand like where your complaints are coming from. I also save scum a lot in that game. So like I'm the kind of person that I'll go through and it'll roll a challenge and I'll fail and I'll just load the save game and do it again and again and again. And I'll do that like 15 times before I get something right. And like I'll have the patience to do that, which I mean adds to game time, right? And maybe it's something where so I agree. It's kind of in a weird state right now, but I hope that Larian will do right by it.
I'm sure it'll be fine. I'm interested to see how they implement the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons rules into a computer system. Like that intrigues me. And like, how do you implement various spells? I find that interesting. Yeah, if you had told me Baldur's Gate 3 is a game that's so tight you can tell the story in 20 hours, I would be so much more on board. Like, I know that
agree.
Nobody else wants that in the world, probably, except for maybe adults. But like, give me a tight game that's 20 hours. It doesn't have meandering side quests or it's not padded out. Like, just a tight, good, fast-paced, exciting story. That's what I want.
Yeah, I actually would, comparing like Pillars of Eternity to Tyranny, I would 100% recommend Tyranny over Pillars of Eternity if you're looking to play like a computer role-playing game, because Tyranny can be played in 20 hours, where Pillars of Eternity, you can put like 60 in. But I feel like the story is like just as good, but like a succinct story is like life incarnate. There is a game, I don't know if you've heard about it. We did mention it before, I don't even remember when, but it's called Solasta, Crown of the Magister. And it is a early access game, but they are using 5th edition SRD. So they're using the stuff that they can use from 5th edition, and it definitely feels more, some people even say it feels more Dungeons and Dragons-y than Baldur's Gate.
I'm looking at it now.
To like, so it's definitely, if you're interested in like a game that adopts D&D rule set that may be a little more complete. I played about 4.5 hours of it, and I enjoyed what I played. And it's kind of, Solasta is kind of cool because you generate 4 characters of your own, and you give them essentially personalities. And in the beginning, the intro, they're all just sitting around an inn waiting for this event to happen, but they don't know each other, and they introduce themselves, and each introduction is a tutorial on how to play that class, and they tell them the story of how they all got together, and it's kind of cool to like be told in that story. And I feel like the story changes a little bit depending on and how they talk, depending on how their personality is. So you can make them like smart and be an aristocrat, and they'll talk a little differently than if they're like a little more rugged and stuff like that. And it's kind of cool going through that.
I'm picturing a character that looks just like you sitting at the table saying, "I'm a thief."
I'm a thief.
I don't know, sitting down with Baldur's Gate 3 too, I think a lot of the time I was playing it when I wasn't watching the cool cinematics, I was thinking, and this is probably blasphemous to say on a video gaming podcast, but like, I should just be playing Dungeons and Dragons with my friends.
That's fair.
Like, I should be planning my campaign or sitting down with my friends and going through these adventures together. Because it's such a great, the only chance I have in life for social interaction anymore.
Right. Yeah.
That's what I should be doing.
It's true.
But I could also see it as being a great source of inspiration for doing your own campaigns and getting a visual sense of a lot of these places that only exist in our imaginations. Like that look at what Baldur's Gate looks like on a modern computer, and an illithid spaceship, and the way the illithids behave and move, and just seeing that, I think as a game master can be really beneficial in helping you visualize and explain things to your players.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think also like voice acting helps, because you'll have professional voice actors pronounce things that we were joking about that we don't know how to pronounce because nobody says them in real life, like Menzo Baranzan or various other things that come up in the D&D world that nobody regularly says, except now, as you mentioned, that there are now like Critical Role and all those things where you have pseudo-professional or professional players doing actual play podcasts where they say things, but they may not say them correctly. Or, well,
Wizard
correctly.
now on D&D Beyond, they do have that pronunciation guide.
The pronunciation guide,
I assume,
yes.
I think it's Matt Mercer. A lot of it's Matt Mercer and his wife, whose name is eluding me right now, Marissa Ray. And you can click on each word or name, and they'll say a lot of them. So that's a fantastic resource too.
That's funny.
Hopefully, I sat down and told them how to do it right.
That's if they didn't consult with me, it's probably wrong.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I'll mention now at this point, I don't know if it's a good time or not, but the one game that has been intriguing me lately and that I wanted to sit down and compare Baldur's Gate 3 with was Disco Elysium.
Yeah.
Have y'all played this already?
I own Disco Elysium. It's a running theme. I own a lot of games. But I actually did play Disco Elysium. It is on my backlog, which are games that I'm dedicated to playing. I've played probably, I want to say 2 hours of it. I enjoyed it. It is more adventure, less roleplay, in my opinion.
I don't know. I haven't played it enough to know, but I'm really intrigued with how I think it's another great tool for game masters to see how to implement the skills that characters may bring to the table beyond just combat skills. It really goes into social skills, intellectual skills, rhetoric, encyclopedic knowledge. You can choose all these skills for your character. And that's a game that I don't think has hardly any combat at all, possibly.
No, it doesn't. It's not a lot.
It's really conversations, figuring out mysteries, persuading people, discerning lies, a lot of this. And I think it sounds, I was really intrigued by the time I played with it. My character, I played for 5 minutes and he tried to get his tie off of the fan that was rotating in the ceiling. And he had a heart attack and died and it was game over. And I was like, this is an interesting game. Let me try that again.
That game is mean.
Apparently so. But I was just
I died sitting in a chair for too long.
So definitely do the save scum. I learned to save scum in that game. But
yes, you definitely need to.
I am more intrigued by that one than I am Baldur's Gate at this point.
Yeah, I like it. It's a fun game. I'm also a very, 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 very big adventure gamer. So like I play a lot. I honestly would probably say that my time is split between adventure games and role-playing games. And as I get older, adventure games are shorter. So I tend to play more adventure games than I do role-playing games because I could play like 4-5 hour Wajidai games versus one 80-hour Obsidian game, and like so it's and still maybe enjoy my time. So I definitely like Disco Elysium was like one of those games I was like, yep, that's mine. And I've it's on my backlog, so it's on my list of games to get back to. But I definitely should get to read more. I should escalate it to get playing to it again. It's a really good game. We can play it and we can chat about it.
I think it would be those two games to play at the same time, or at least in close proximity, would be an interesting contrast. Baldur's Gate 3 and Disco Elysium, like playing them kind of back to back or at the same time, just to compare how they implement different things, I think would be very interesting.
Yeah, agreed. So that's going to be the Baldur's Gate portion of our episode. Does anyone have any final thoughts about good old Baldur's Gate or any of the other?
Make sure to play Dark Alliance.
I was going to say, make sure that, we talked about Baldur's Gate led into a bunch of other series. Planescape Torment was the one I mentioned earlier, and I think that's the one that holds it the best over time. And there's also a remastered version of that one. And that one really explores the multiverse of D&D. And cool. It has a lot of the it's crazy. I don't even want to spoil anything about this game because the NPCs or the player character party members, whatever you call them, that you bring into your group are so unique. I remember them to this day. And I remember playing this game. I remember I bought a laptop to play this game because we were going on vacation for 4th of July and we were going to the beach and I needed a computer because I had to play this game. And I bought this computer and took it there and I remember lying on the bed. I was at the beach and I closed myself off into a bedroom and closed the door and didn't even go out to the beach because I wanted to play Planescape Torment. And I remember the feelings that game brought up in me. And that's the one I really want to go back and play again. That's a fantastic game.
Yeah, I definitely need to. As much of a like computer role-playing fiend that I am, I have not actually beaten Planescape Torment. I should really put it. Don't you go to Sigil in that game, the City of Doors?
I think so.
Like, I feel like you do. I feel like that's one of the few games that actually represents Sigil as like in a video game, as it were. Mm-hmm. I know you start off in like the moratorium, but yeah, and that once again, it's a very good game. There is a lot of reading, so if you don't like reading, you're not gonna like it. But there is like characters will go on for books,
and that's where if you're interested in the Tides of Numenera and any of the Monty Cook stuff that came after that, you can that's where some of that got its genesis.
Yes, yep, Tides of Numenera also has a lot of reading.
Yes, it does. They're verbose for sure. And then they did a spiritual follow-up to that game, Tides of Numenera. I think it's called Tides of Numenera. Is that the name of the video game? Yeah, that came out just like a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And so that's another one that I've been meaning to dip into, and who has time?
You're right.
I know.
But yeah, I would like to see it, but I haven't yet.
I also own that. I kickstarted it.
Me too.
Well, so what happens is somebody says Monty Cook, and I'm like, yes, please.
Oh yeah, I have a whole bunch of Monty Cook, and he brought Numenera to 5e as well. There's some books out there, so if you want to play it, bring it to Numenera. Like, we're doing videos on those as soon as I can find the time.
I love Monty Cook.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's really creative science fiction, fantasy, post-apocalyptic. It's amazing stuff.
So the final section that we ended out with is our buy, wait, pass segment. So we will go through games that we're excited to buy, wait, or pass on. So as the ritual persists throughout this pod, Theo, do you want to take us away with a game that you are excited about buying, waiting, or passing on?
Sure. Spoiler alert, I already bought it.
Well, that's the best kind.
I probably didn't. Well, one, I figure I can also write it off in the taxes because I'm using it for a podcast where I'm talking about the channel. But one game that I was excited about, and I've been kind of sitting on, I was waiting for a long time, was Subnautica Below Zero. And this kind of goes back to my talk about No Man's Sky earlier, and how this is the kind of game I'm kind of digging, just relaxing and enjoying, is the survival games where you build up your base and make your character cooler stuff and explore an environment that's beautiful and just kind of chill out. And this game is gorgeous. If you've ever played the original Subnautica, which was free on the Epic Game Store last year, which is where I got it, you're in an underwater environment. You build up your base, you explore the area. There's a bit of a story involved, and you kind of go deeper and deeper into this planet and discover what's really going on there. And Subnautica Below Zero is a follow-up game by Unknown Worlds Entertainment. It's in early access right now over on Steam and probably other places. It seems to be close to being completed. Nothing about it, unlike Baldur's Gate 3, nothing where the characters' mouths don't move when they talk. The Subnautica Below Zero feels pretty much close to finished to me at this point. I haven't really noticed anything that stands out as being particularly buggy, so it's probably going to be out in the near future. But it's also a smaller game that's more easily accessible. And it's just a gorgeous way to just explore an underwater, beautiful Arctic environment and see pretty fish and kill them and eat them and turn them into flashlights. And build up your base and build submarines, and it's just good fun. And there's weird alien penguins, and what else could you want besides weird alien penguins?
Yeah, right.
Comparatively to like the OG Subnautica, do you think because I know this it's its own standalone game and it's still single player. Do you think that the changes between Subnautica and Below Zero are worth getting Below Zero? I haven't picked up Below Zero yet, but I played a lot of Subnautica, and Subnautica was actually one of the few games that have made me jump out in fear and nope right out of something, where I was like, nope.
I couldn't finish Subnautica, I think, because I couldn't handle just going deeper and deeper underwater. Like the thought of the drowning, I just couldn't handle it, and so I had to stop when I was getting so far deep under. Like I had to bring the submarine down. Like it's like, okay, this is too much for me. I can't deal with this anymore.
Scary, yeah.
It was scary. I don't know if I'm far enough into Below Zero yet to really be able to judge that. Right now, it feels identical to the original Subnautica. I don't notice any real differences besides the environment. But it's also been a hot minute since I played the original, so I might be just wistfully remembering, and there's innovations here. Because again, I've only played about, 45 minutes of this, of Subnautica. Oh, the one thing I will say, I was having trouble with the save game on that, and might have some unique thing to do with my computer. But for these games, you don't really want to lose progress. It's very frustrating.
Right,
so
yeah.
It may be worth just waiting until it comes out. It's full price right now anyway, so there's no real reason to get it in early access. So, if I was not buying it for the podcast, I would probably say wait on it until it comes out. So it's a good one to wait on because there's no reason to get it now. But it looks good fun if you like Subnautica. I mean, why not? If you want it, this is more Subnautica.
Excellent.
So I'll just follow up with a game that I've been playing. It's in early access. I've been playing a little bit of it. It's a demo. It is Timberborn, and it's being developed by Mechanistry, and it is a building survival game that's very similar to Frostpunk in regards to having some sort of detrimental condition that you have to overcome regularly. And except instead of being humans, you are beavers. And you live alongside this river that you go through wet season and dry seasons. And when it's dry season, the whole river dries up and you need water to live. It's an interesting kind of mechanic. Not only the dry and wet season kind of interesting, but the way that you can build in the game. You can like stack stuff on top of themselves, so you can have like solid structures that you can then build more structures on top, and you can build stairs. And the way that they do power is kind of cool, so you have to build like a water wheel that you can then connect with wooden poles back to where there's a power source, and you can power like a carpenter shop and a baker's shop and stuff like that. And it's really cool destructible environment where you destroy tiles. So it's all like tile base, and every tile has like different assets on it, and you can blow up the tiles to lower them down, because it's like a multi-tier tile, kind of like a cake, and you can blow it away, and you can get water into like lakes and stuff like that, and you can expand the water from the river, bringing it further. And the water has a radius of life that it gives to it, and everything else that's not near the water is dead. So if you want to have like more trees to gnaw down with your beavers, you have to get water closer and closer to those trees to bring them life, or build like water towers and stuff like that. But in the dry season, it's very difficult to maintain that. So that's Timberborn. It's I'm gonna put it down as a wait, but tilting towards buy, since I like games like Frostpunk, which has like the heat and cold element, and it's just like an interesting, fun take on a building game that I've kind of been getting into my mind. But by the time that this podcast comes out, Nebuchadnezzar will have released, so I'll be wicked happy.
And these are anthropomorphic beavers. Okay.
Yeah, they're just beavers that like go to work.
They're beaver people. Yeah, I was looking at the thing, like they're building buildings and reservoirs. Like, oh, okay, this is not what I was anticipating. Yeah. Okay.
They're just like they're like, so the game is like, if all humans died, then beavers are left to do things, but they're smart.
They evolved, right?
They're just evolved beavers that just go out and do things.
How did you like Frostpunk? Is one of those games that I've been meaning to pick up. You like that one a lot, I take it?
Yeah, I like Frostpunk. It's hard. There's some games that I like to think I like, and then I'm very bad at, and then kind of get frustrated with playing them. The Total War series is one of those type games where I think that I'm going to like Total War, and then I'm really bad at conducting armies and die miserably every time, and then I get frustrated. Frostpunk is like border on that. It's tough, but it's like enjoyable tough, where it's fun. It is very, very frustrating if something bad happens and your entire thing, like everybody just dies. It's just, especially if you built so much into it. But it is a cool, it's just graphically very pretty as well. I think that it really lends to being like really, really like just that. If you like that steampunk type of style, then you'll probably like the Frostpunk style, because it's very steampunk bordering like dieselpunk type of technology, and it's just kind of cool dieselpunk and snow type of feel to it, which is fun. It's tough. It's a hell of a game.
So my buy weight pass is a little different from both of your guys' buy weight passes, because mine is actually a piece of hardware. It's not software. So it's kind of unique to Classic Gaming Brothers. Usually we talk about software, but it is kind of retro, so that's why I am throwing it on here. But it's this thing called the Commander X16, which is an in-development computer by David Murray, who is also known as the 8-Bit Guy on YouTube. The purpose of the X16 is to be this quote-unquote new 8-bit style computer for the modern era. The idea is to create a completely new computer system that runs Commodore BASIC without using something like emulation or FPGA, which is Field Programmable Gate Array, which is a form of hardware emulation. So his team is currently planning and aiming to have an inexpensive system, potentially being around $100 or so or less if they can find a way to mass market it. And I've been playing around with the emulator that they have available through their website to try to play around with some games and doing some basic programming. And it's so far pretty cool. It's a neat little device. I think they're also potentially planning on selling it as a kit, which I'm interested in. I do like electronics, and I like building kits. So if they do end up selling it as a kit, I would love to buy it as a kit. It would probably be a even more inexpensive option if you have to build it yourself. But that's kind of the fun, is building something and figuring out why it doesn't work because you didn't solder something correctly. But it looks really cool. I like the idea that it's this new device that is doing something that you could easily just do if you use an emulator or buy something that like runs, like has a Commodore 64, like just buy a Commodore 64, right? But it's this whole idea of this guy, David Murray, really wanted to make his dream computer, and now that he has the resources and some of the talent behind it, he's doing it. I only have it down as a wait because there is no given timeline for when this thing is going to be finished. It's mostly a hobby between all these people working on it, so they're working on it kind of on their own time. They call themselves a non-for-profit because they're just looking to do this to get it out there. They don't have a deadline. They don't have anyone like really crowdfunding this. So when it's done, I guess is their logic. And I will follow along the path of progress, and we'll see what it's like when it comes out. But probably we'll pick it up depending on, a variety of factors, especially if they can keep the price under 100. I think that's a lofty goal, but I would prefer something under 100.
Well, that's because you're cheap.
It is because I'm cheap. I'm not afraid to admit that. But I do love retro game systems and retro computers and programming in BASIC.
My first computer ran off cassette tapes.
Oh, yes.
Which to me still seems like magic. I don't understand how you put a tape in a machine and you hit play and then you type in like execute and it works. I don't understand how that process works, but it did, and it was magical.
Beautiful. I love that.
Ours was a word processor.
Barely a computer, but yeah.
Which was barely a computer. And then we had a 486 with Windows 3.11.
That was like my fifth computer. Mine was a Tandy. It's a Radio Shack Tandy computer.
Was it a TRS-80?
I don't remember what model it was. I have to check. It was when they first introduced this brand new concept called a floppy disk. And but it was an upgrade. 5 1/4. Yeah, it was the first 5 1/4 one, but we couldn't afford that, so we didn't get that upgrade. We just had the old style cassette tape.
So with that, first off, I want to thank Theo for coming on to our show. Theo represents the Gallant Goblin, which you can find on YouTube. He has a YouTube, an Instagram, a Discord now, a new Discord. And I'm pretty sure a Twitter and maybe a Facebook, probably Facebook. Yeah. Everywhere, all the social medias.
We're in all the places. Pretty soon we're going to be starting up a Twitch thing where I don't know what I'm going to do. That might be my excuse.
You play games with us.
Yeah, that might be my excuse to actually play some video games.
We also have a Twitch. You follow us on Twitch. We don't Twitch very often, as you may know, because we don't send you any notifications.
You Twitch more than I do. I haven't gotten into it yet, but I'm working on it. One of my good friends, Michaela, works for Twitch, and so she's supposed to hook me up and tell me how to do it. But I have high hopes.
Oh, good. Perfect. I have high hopes as well. I feel that I think the Gallant Goblin is a great resource, especially if you are a D&D or have any interest in D&D. You may be listening to this from watching the Gallant Goblin. We appreciate you coming over here to listen to this episode. We ask if you did listen to this episode, check out some other episodes. But if you're a CGB fan and you're listening to this episode, go check out the Gallant Goblin. If you have any interest in any in role playing at all, or if you just I like it, once again, the most methodical YouTube videos on the internet. The Gallant Goblin, it's great. I love it. I'm gonna feed Theo's ego a little bit here.
Feed me.
I told one of my players, he's the DM right now, but he's part of my D&D group. This was maybe right when I initiated the original email. I said, I'm going to have Theo from the Gallant Goblin on our podcast. He's like, you're going to have Theo from, he's like, I love the Gallant Goblin. It's great. Which, I mean, maybe at one point in time I told him to watch the Gallant Goblin. I honestly have no idea why I started watching the Gallant Goblin, but I mean, I do, and it's great. They are really well done. You guys just knock it out of the park. Even when you were doing it from your Airbnb, it just feels very professional. It's just really, really well done. You guys definitely will. I feel like you guys are like at the beginning of something that's going to be really, really great. With Classic Gaming Brothers, we're pretty much at the plateau. This is pretty much what we got, and this is where we're going. Just straight on through.
I appreciate that. Every day here feels like we're flying by the seat of our pants, just trying to get from one little thing to the next. And so hearing that means a lot. I really appreciate that. And you know, hope your listeners will stop in and say hi. And it's a great little community too. Even just getting into the Discord that we just started up, there's some really great conversations, people sharing the things that they've made and they've painted, stories they've written. There's some really good people there, and we don't have to delete hardly any YouTube comments, which is amazing.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's a really good community. I've liked the chatter so far. It's actually one of the few Discords that I actually check in regularly. So, and I try to read most of the conversations, which is, I'm part of a lot, and I generally ignore them. I'm not as much as I love Discord, like I've been on it since it launched, I'm really bad at being like a community Discord person. But I do really like the community of Gallant Goblin. I feel like I could say something there and people listen and appreciate it. And so, yeah, if you want a really cool community, you want really good videos, check out Gallant Goblin. 100% subscribe to them, follow them. Just subscribe and follow if you, even if you don't like D&D. Just do it, just because we said so.
We'll get you. We'll make you like it.
There we go.
That's
whether
right.
you want to or not.
That's right.
It's good stuff.
That's right.
Everybody should enjoy it.
It's good. It is honestly really good stuff.
Thank you very much.
So you're welcome, and thank you for spending probably one of our longest episodes yet, which is great, which is good. I mean, it was a good conversation, and I really enjoyed having you on. Hopefully we will collaborate in the future. So with that, we're going to do our own little thing here. Did you do the call to? Do you want?
Well, I don't know. I'll do it.
All right. This is where I take a nap.
All right. So if you want to listen to us, get in touch with us and support us, there's plenty of ways to do that. If you want to listen to us, you're already listening to us. So there you go. Though, if you want to tell people how to listen to us, such as all of the Gallant Goblin fans who are going to be listening to this episode, and you want to spread it around, spread the classic gaming brother love, then that sounds weird.
They ball spawn?
They are ball spawn.
Just like ball spawn.
The classic gaming spawn.
Brother spawn.
You can listen to us via any of the podcasting applications out there. It's Spotify, Amazon, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. We are on all of them, even the smaller ones out there. We're there. If there's a podcasting application that we're not on and you make us aware of it, we'll make sure to be on it as best as we can, and that's a classic gaming promise. If you want to reach out to us, you can do so by going to our website, classicgamingbrothers.com, and going to the contact form page. On that contact form, you just type in all your information. It will go magically through the internet over to our email inbox, because it's pretty much just works as an email redirect. So you can also email us, classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com or classicgamingbrothers@classicgamingbrothers.com, because that's the best email ever. And we will be in touch with you. If you send us an email, you'll also enter in a chance to win a free video game, and potentially the announcer of our Christmas special will record a message on your home answering machine. And not just your voicemail box, like for your cell phone. We will find a way to get the micro cassette recorded and sent out to you for your ancient 1970s home answering machine. That's a classic.
Actually, we'll mail you one of those too.
We'll just mail you a home answering machine. I'll go to Savers. I'll buy a home answering machine and find a cassette for it. Good to go. If you want to support us, there's plenty of ways to support us. You can go to all of our different social medias. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're on Twitter. Facebook and Instagram, we're Classic Gaming Brothers. Twitter, we are CG Brothers Pod. So like us, ring bells, subscribe, do all those things. We're also on Twitch, twitch.tv/Classic Gaming Brothers. And we're also on YouTube, but we don't really do a lot of stuff there. So I don't know why I remind people, but we are on YouTube.
If you want to give us a subscription, you can bring us up to the high 20s.
Yeah, exactly. You could also, another great way to support us is just by telling people about the podcast. Tell 3 friends, because if you tell 3 people, that means you like something. If you tell more people, it means you don't. And you could also go to our website and go to our store, and we have a t-shirt for sale and a mug. It's great. I think that's everything. So, Seth, is there anything else you want to add?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And I've been Theo.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers. And Theo.
And Theo. That's right. I was going to say, you guys, you should have whacked me for that. I'm overstepping my boundaries. That's the first time in 65 episodes that I've overstepped my boundaries.
Yeah, I do it all the time.
Yeah, I know.
That's just all I do.
He's bad.
That's why I'm the younger brother, is because I overstep boundaries.
Boundaries are made to be overstepped.